Have you ever wondered how far a government is willing to go to secure its borders? What happens when two powerful nations find themselves at odds over immigration policies, security, and sovereignty? Right now, the US military is building up at the southern border with Mexico, and the situation is growing more intense by the day. This military presence is not just about national security, it's a dramatic shift that has the potential to impact everything from trade relations to the lives of thousands of people trying to cross the border. But it's not just the US government making waves. In Mexico, Claudia Sheinbaum, the presidential candidate, is preparing to challenge the very policies that have sparked this massive deployment of US troops. Sheinbaum has made it clear she won't sit back and let Trump's aggressive approach dictate the future of Mexico's relationship with its northern neighbor. The question is, how far will she go to ensure that Trump feels the consequences of these policies? As the US military continues to amass at the border, the stakes couldn't be higher. This situation is a powder keg waiting to explode. But before we dive into what comes next, let's take a look at the larger picture. What's really behind this military buildup, and what does it mean for the future of US-Mexico relations? The US military's recent buildup at the southern border with Mexico has sent shockwaves throughout both countries, intensifying an already fragile situation. But what does this move really mean? Is it a mere tactical shift, or is it part of a much larger geopolitical game? As the US sends more troops, equipment, and resources to the region, one can't help but wonder if this is the beginning of a new chapter in the ongoing battle over immigration, security, and sovereignty. The tension between the two nations is reaching new heights, and the US military's presence is only adding fuel to the fire. At first glance, it may appear as a simple reaction to an ongoing issue that has plagued the border for years: illegal immigration. But the implications of such a massive military deployment go far beyond border control. This isn't just about preventing people from crossing the border, it's about sending a message to Mexico and the world. The US is making a statement that it will not tolerate what it sees as a growing crisis on its southern border, one that has been politically charged for decades. This military presence, however, may not only intensify tensions with Mexico, but could spark a broader geopolitical shift, one that could alter the course of the relationship between these two neighboring countries for years to come. As we look at the situation unfolding, it's hard not to notice the historical context that surrounds this buildup. The US has had a long history of militarizing its borders, using military power not only as a tool for control, but also as a show of force to assert its dominance. This isn't the first time that American military power has been used in such a way, and it likely won't be the last. But this time feels different. This time the stakes are much higher. The world is watching, and so is Mexico. In the past, military deployments along the border have typically been short-term operations aimed at bolstering border security for a limited period. However, this new build-up seems different in its scope and its timing. It's happening at a time of heightened political tension between the US and Mexico, and many are asking whether this is the beginning of a more permanent military presence in the region. How far will this military escalation go? Will it escalate into something even more significant, or is it simply a show of force meant to intimidate and control the situation? For Mexico, the implications of this military buildup are far-reaching. The presence of US troops at the border is not only a political statement, it's also a direct challenge to Mexican sovereignty. It's a reminder that the US sees the border as a dividing line that must be protected at all costs. But how will Mexico respond to this show of power? Will it take a more diplomatic approach, seeking to ease tensions and find common ground, or will it be forced to stand its ground, risking further escalation? This is where the role of Mexican political leaders like Claudia Sheinbaum comes into play. With the US military presence at the border becoming more pronounced, the pressure is mounting on Mexico's leadership to respond. How will Claudia Sheinbaum, a strong contender for the presidency, handle this situation? She has made it clear that she won't tolerate Trump's policies, but what actions will she take to counteract the growing US presence? The world is watching, and the next steps taken by both countries could set the tone for their relationship for years to come. As the US continues to ramp up its military presence, the question remains, what will be the long-term consequences? Will this military build-up lead to a more hardened border, or will it open the door to new diplomatic strategies aimed at easing tensions? Only time will tell, but one thing is certain, the situation is far from over. The US-Mexico border is now ground zero for a battle that could redefine the future of both nations. What are your thoughts on this military escalation? Do you think it will help secure the border, or will it only deepen the divide between the two countries? Let me know in the comments below. Claudia Sheinbaum's bold stance against Trump's policies. As the US military strengthens its presence at the southern border, one Mexican leader stands out in her defiance against the escalating tensions between the two countries. Claudia Sheinbaum, the presidential candidate in Mexico, has wasted no time in making her position clear. She will not let the aggressive policies of the Trump administration dictate the future of Mexico's relationship with its northern neighbor. But how far is she willing to go to make a stand? Sheinbaum is not just challenging the actions of a foreign government, she's positioning herself as a beacon of resistance, one that could have significant consequences on the political landscape of both countries. What makes Sheinbaum's response so striking is the combination of diplomacy, strength, and national pride that she has embraced. While many political figures would shy away from directly challenging the might of the United States, Sheinbaum is confronting the situation head-on, presenting herself as a leader willing to protect Mexico's sovereignty, no matter the cost. This isn't just a matter of national politics, it's about asserting Mexico's place in the world stage, something that many leaders have failed to do in the face of the overwhelming power of the US. Sheinbaum, however, is determined to ensure that her country is not steamrolled by foreign interests. Claudia's response to Trump's border policies goes beyond mere words. Her rhetoric is not just about standing against militarization or advocating for migrant rights. It's about sending a message to the United States that Mexico will not back down in the face of pressure. This is especially important as Trump's policies continue to shape public perception, not only in the US, but around the world. For Sheinbaum, the battle isn't just political, it's personal. Her words and actions are a direct reflection of her vision for a more independent Mexico, one that isn't subject to the whims of foreign powers. What is also crucial in this moment is the strategic approach Sheinbaum has taken. While others may opt for more confrontational tactics, Sheinbaum has advocated for diplomacy and cooperation, but on her terms. She understands that Mexico's relationship with the US cannot be boiled down to a simple US vs them dynamic. It's a complex, multifaceted relationship that requires careful negotiation, strategic alliances, and sometimes a firm stance. By making her position known so early on in her campaign, Sheinbaum is not only showing her readiness to lead, but she's also making it clear to both the Mexican people and the international community that her leadership will be defined by strength, sovereignty, and respect for national dignity. But while Sheinbaum has made it clear that she won't tolerate Trump's policies, the question arises, how far is she willing to push this stance? Would she take economic or diplomatic actions that could risk further alienation between the two countries? In some ways, it seems like a delicate balancing act. She must project power, yet avoid escalating the situation into an irreversible conflict. Many are watching to see if Sheinbaum will lean into her hard stance, perhaps taking Mexico into uncharted waters, or if she'll temper her rhetoric for the sake of maintaining a workable relationship with the US. As she continues to rise in the polls, Sheinbaum is quickly becoming a figurehead for those who feel marginalized or threatened by Trump's policies. She's representing a voice that refuses to be silenced, one that echoes the frustrations of many Mexicans who view the military buildup and other U.S. policies as an affront to their national pride. The stakes are high for Sheinbaum. She's not just fighting for political power in Mexico, she's fighting to redefine the country's role on the world stage. As this geopolitical conflict continues to evolve, her leadership could have a lasting impact on how Mexico navigates its relationship with the U.S. and how the two countries move forward from this critical moment. For now, it remains to be seen how this will all play out, but one thing is certain: Claudia Sheinbaum is making her mark. Her defiance against Trump's border policies is more than just a political stance. It's a declaration of a new era for Mexican politics. The question is, will her leadership be enough to shift the balance of power, or will the growing tensions with the U.S. prove too much to overcome? What do you think? Could Sheinbaum's bold stance truly change the future of Mexico's relationship with the United States? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. A look back. The militarization of the border. To understand the present tension at the U.S.-Mexico border, it's crucial to take a step back and look at the history that has led to this critical moment. The militarization of the border isn't a recent development. In fact, it has been a gradual process unfolding over decades, shaped by political agendas, public fear, and a growing desire for control. It's easy to think of the border today as a heavily fortified zone, with soldiers and border patrol agents stationed every few miles, but this was not always the case. The history of militarization at the border is a complex one, with roots that stretch back to the early 20th century. However, the real acceleration of this militarization began in the late 1980s and early 1990s, when the U.S. government, under both Democratic and Republican administrations, began ramping up security measures in response to rising concerns about illegal immigration and drug trafficking. The creation of Operation Gatekeeper in 1994 marked a pivotal moment as the U.S. Border Patrol began using military-grade equipment, including surveillance technology, drones, and high-tech fencing, to prevent people from crossing the border. This marked the beginning of a new era in which the U.S. government increasingly viewed the border not just as a line of separation, but as a battleground. The militarization of the border only escalated after the September 11th attacks in 2001. The global war on terror provided a convenient justification for further increasing military presence along the U.S.-Mexico border. As resources were funneled into national security efforts, the border became not only a symbol of U.S. sovereignty, but also a critical front in the fight against terrorism, despite the fact that the vast majority of people crossing the border are simply seeking a better life, not posing any security threat. This change in focus was pivotal, as it blurred the lines between immigration enforcement and national security, making it easier for the U.S. to justify a growing military presence in the region. The border, once a region primarily watched over by civilian immigration officials, slowly became a zone of military operations. It wasn't long before military forces, including the National Guard, were deployed to assist with border security. The U.S. began building more advanced physical barriers and deploying more drones, surveillance cameras, and other high-tech tools to monitor the area. This heavy-handed approach quickly became a hallmark of U.S. policy under both Republican and Democratic administrations. But as the years went on, these measures didn't necessarily result in fewer illegal crossings or greater security. Instead, they sparked intense debates about the effectiveness and morality of a militarized border, especially as the humanitarian costs began to rise. The increased militarization has led to a situation where more migrants are risking their lives to cross the border, with many being caught in dangerous terrain or facing brutal treatment by authorities. By the time the Trump administration came to power, the militarization of the border had already become an entrenched part of US policy. However, Trump's presidency marked a dramatic shift. His approach to the border was not only to militarize it further, but also to make it a central point of his political agenda. The "Build the Wall" slogan became synonymous with his campaign, and the border wall became his signature issue. But Trump's vision of the border was even more extreme than what had come before. In 2018, he authorized the deployment of thousands of active-duty military troops to the border, a move that many saw as an overreaction to a caravan of migrants heading toward the US. This further militarized an already tense situation, turning the border into a symbol of Trump's America First policies, built on the idea that security and sovereignty could only be maintained through force. The legacy of this militarization is still felt today. The US border has become a hotbed of political and humanitarian tensions, where the presence of military forces only deepens the divide between the US and Mexico. But the question remains, is this approach actually achieving the desired results? Or is it creating a more volatile, dangerous situation for both sides? As the US continues to ramp up its military presence under the Biden administration, it's clear that the border remains one of the most contentious and complex issues between the two countries. While some argue that the increased militarization is necessary for national security, others believe it's only exacerbating the crisis. As we move forward, it's crucial to consider not just the security implications of a militarized border, but also the broader consequences on the relationship between the US and Mexico, and how these policies shape the future of immigration in both countries. Now, with the US military once again at the border, tensions are at a breaking point. The question isn't just about how much military force is enough, but how long this cycle of escalation will continue, and what will it take to break it? What do you think? Is the militarization of the border a necessary response, or has it only made things worse? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The impact on migrants. Will this strategy succeed? As the US continues to pour military resources into the border region, the question arises, what will be the real impact on the people who are directly affected by these policies? The migrants. These are men, women, and children seeking refuge, safety, and a better future. They are not simply statistics or political pawns to be moved around on a chessboard. They are individuals, each with their own story, fleeing violence, poverty, and despair in their home countries. Yet, as the US military presence grows, the situation becomes increasingly dire for those trying to cross the border. For many, the military buildup only adds another layer of risk, making the already perilous journey even more dangerous. The increased presence of armed forces and surveillance technology means that these migrants will not only face the natural dangers of the desert or the brutal conditions of overcrowded detention centers, but also the threat of more aggressive enforcement tactics. This is a stark reality that is difficult to ignore. But will this strategy actually work? Will the bolstered military presence stop the flow of migrants, or will it only create more problems? While the idea behind this military escalation is to prevent illegal immigration and protect national security, the reality is much more complicated. The US government seems to believe that more military presence will result in fewer crossings, but studies have shown that militarization has not been particularly effective in achieving long-term reductions in migration. In fact, it often leads to unintended consequences, such as pushing migrants into more dangerous and remote areas, where they are at greater risk of dehydration, injury, or worse. The simple fact is that migrants are not deterred by the threat of military force. They are not crossing the border for fun or because they want to break the law. They are fleeing dire circumstances, whether it's gang violence, economic hardship, or political instability. The desperation they feel is what drives them to risk everything, including their lives, in search of safety and opportunity. Furthermore, the US military's presence at the border also raises significant human rights concerns. The increased militarization of the region has been linked to reports of abuses and violations committed by border enforcement officers and military personnel. Migrants, often already vulnerable, are at risk of mistreatment, including physical violence, exploitation, and denial of their basic rights. As the US military takes on a more prominent role in border enforcement, it's important to ask, who is held accountable for these actions? Who ensures that the rights and dignity of those seeking refuge are respected? The more militarized the border becomes, the more likely it is that such abuses will continue to be overlooked or even justified in the name of national security. While the US government may argue that military presence is necessary to protect its borders, it is clear that this approach does not address the root causes of migration. It fails to tackle the systemic issues that force people to leave their homes in the first place, such as poverty, corruption, and violence. The military might be able to stop some people from crossing the border, but it cannot solve the deeper problems driving migration. Until these root causes are addressed, the flow of migrants will likely continue, regardless of how many troops are stationed at the border. Moreover, the current US strategy risks making the situation worse for everyone involved. By relying heavily on military force, the government is not only harming migrants, but also straining its relationships with Mexico and other countries in the region. Mexico, already struggling with its own issues related to migration and border security, faces increased pressure to cooperate with US military efforts, even if it means sacrificing its own sovereignty in the process. This could have long-term consequences, further complicating the already delicate diplomatic relationship between the two countries. For the migrants, the situation is becoming more dangerous by the day. With every increase in military presence, the risk of violent confrontation, abuse, and exploitation grows. And for those who are able to make it across the border, they may face an uncertain future in the US, one marked by fear of deportation, uncertainty about their legal status, and the constant threat of being separated from their families. The military's strategy may be presented as a means of protecting the country, but it's clear that it's not just the US that's being affected. The consequences of this militarization ripple across the region, affecting not only the migrants, but also the broader political and humanitarian landscape. As the US continues its military buildup, it's vital to ask, is this truly the solution to the crisis at the border, or is it merely a temporary measure that fails to address the bigger issues at play? Will it make the border safer, or will it only increase the suffering of those who are already vulnerable? What do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Is Mexico ready for a confrontation with the US? As the US military strengthens its position at the southern border, the pressure on Mexico to respond is mounting. The question that now lingers is, how prepared is Mexico for a potential confrontation with its powerful neighbor to the north? The reality is that Mexico's government faces a complex and difficult situation. On the one hand, Mexico cannot afford to appear weak in the face of escalating US military actions, especially when those actions challenge Mexico's sovereignty and threaten its people. On the other hand, Mexico has long depended on its relationship with the US for trade, security, and economic stability. To make matters even more complicated, the pressure isn't just coming from the US government, but also from within Mexico itself, where a growing wave of nationalist sentiment is pushing for a stronger stance against US interference. Mexico's leadership, including figures like Claudia Sheinbaum, understands that a full-blown confrontation with the US would be disastrous for both nations. Yet Mexico's response to the increasing militarization of its border with the US cannot be passive. The nation cannot simply accept the idea that the US has the right to dictate how Mexico manages its border security or immigration policies. The sovereignty of the nation is at stake. However, any major move against the US risks not only disrupting the fragile diplomatic balance, but also potentially damaging the economies of both countries. Trade between the US and Mexico is worth hundreds of billions of dollars annually, and a rupture in relations could send shockwaves through the global market. Mexico must walk a fine line, balancing assertiveness with diplomacy, ensuring it stands up for its sovereignty while also maintaining crucial economic and political ties. At the same time, the Mexican people are watching closely. Over the years, many have become frustrated with what they perceive as the US's growing interference in Mexico's affairs, from border policies to trade agreements. National pride is at stake, and the public's support for a more assertive stance against the US is growing. But how will Mexico respond in practice? Claudia Sheinbaum, as a potential future leader, is in a unique position to influence the country's approach. She has already made clear that she would not let Trump's harsh policies go unchallenged, but the challenge lies in the specifics of how to respond. While some may call for aggressive measures, others argue that diplomacy is the only way forward, emphasizing the importance of maintaining peace and stability between the two countries. One option for Mexico is to continue leveraging its diplomatic influence, working through international bodies such as the United Nations or the Organization of American States to bring global attention to the situation. This strategy would allow Mexico to garner international support while avoiding direct conflict. The issue of border militarization could be framed as a violation of international norms, which could put pressure on the US to reassess its actions. However, diplomacy often takes time, and the situation at the border is rapidly escalating. Mexico might find itself running out of time to engage in prolonged negotiations before the situation becomes irreversible. Another option for Mexico is to push for stronger domestic policies to counteract the effects of US actions. This could include implementing measures that protect migrant rights within Mexico and ensuring that people seeking refuge from US policies are not left vulnerable. While this would demonstrate Mexico's commitment to human rights, it may not be enough to deter US actions or address the underlying issue of military escalation. What's clear is that Mexico cannot sit idly by while its sovereignty is threatened. The internal political landscape in Mexico also adds another layer of complexity. The Mexican government, no matter who is in power, must consider the views of various political factions. Some of Mexico's more conservative elements might push for a hardline stance against the US, advocating for greater military readiness or even cutting ties with the US altogether. However, such measures would likely have severe consequences, particularly in the areas of trade and security cooperation. On the other hand, a more moderate approach may be seen as weak by some segments of the population, leading to political instability within Mexico. Claudia Sheinbaum's leadership could be pivotal in navigating this complex terrain. As a candidate, she has shown a willingness to stand up to US policies, but how she balances nationalism with diplomacy will be one of the defining features of her presidency. In the face of such a daunting challenge, Mexico must decide whether to confront the US head-on, continue its diplomatic engagement, or find a middle ground. The stakes are incredibly high, and the world is watching to see how the next phase of this geopolitical drama will unfold. What are your thoughts on Mexico's response? Should the government take a more confrontational approach or focus on diplomacy? Let me know in the comments below Trump's border policies and their effect on the Mexican elections. The consequences of Trump's aggressive border policies extend far beyond the US. And as Mexico heads toward its upcoming elections, the influence of these policies cannot be ignored. In fact, the policies set forth by the Trump administration are quickly becoming a defining issue in the Mexican political landscape, potentially shifting the balance of power and shaping the country's future. The question is, how much of a role will Trump's stance on the border play in Mexico's election? And will it pave the way for a shift in Mexico's political climate? From the moment Donald Trump made immigration a central theme of his campaign, it became clear that U.S. policies would have a ripple effect on its neighbors, especially Mexico. His hardline stance, which included calling for a wall along the southern border and deploying more military resources to curb immigration, struck a nerve in Mexico. For many, Trump's rhetoric was not just offensive, it was an affront to Mexico's sovereignty and its dignity as a nation. The sense of outrage over these policies has fueled growing discontent, and as a result, many Mexican voters are increasingly focused on how their own political leaders will respond to the U.S. president's actions. As the election approaches, Mexican politicians are beginning to weigh in on the impact of Trump's border policies and how they will shape the future of Mexico-U.S. relations. For Claudia Sheinbaum, the presidential candidate, the issue of border security and immigration has taken center stage. She has been vocal in her opposition to Trump's aggressive tactics, presenting herself as a leader who will stand up for Mexico's interests. Her criticism of Trump's administration is not just a matter of principle, but a strategic move to rally the Mexican electorate. As the current mayor of Mexico City, Sheinbaum has a strong base of support, but the true test of her leadership will come when the election voters in Mexico look at her approach to dealing with the U.S. But is she the only one who stands to benefit politically from Trump's policies? Mexico's relationship with the U.S. is often seen through the lens of trade and security cooperation, but the impact of the border policies is also making waves in Mexico's internal political scene. The recent tensions have added fuel to the fire of nationalism in Mexico, with many citizens beginning to view the U.S. as an overbearing neighbor whose policies threaten to undermine their country's sovereignty. This rising nationalism is, in some ways, playing into the hands of candidates like Sheinbaum, who can present themselves as the defenders of Mexican values. The anti-Trump sentiment is becoming a key aspect of the political rhetoric as candidates aim to appeal to voters who feel increasingly alienated by U.S. actions. But nationalism alone may not be enough to secure a win for Sheinbaum or any other candidate who opposes Trump. While the anti-Trump rhetoric is undeniably powerful, it's important to understand that Mexico's relationship with the U.S. is complex and not easily reduced to political soundbites. The reality is that Mexico depends on the U.S. for trade, investment, and security. A hardline stance against the U.S. could have serious economic and diplomatic consequences, making it a delicate balance to strike. Mexico's leadership must find ways to stand up for its sovereignty without provoking a diplomatic crisis that could send shockwaves through both countries' economies. Moreover, Trump's border policies have also brought attention to the growing issue of migration in the region. The way that Mexico addresses this issue in the election could play a significant role in shaping the electorate's decision. While Sheinbaum and other candidates may criticize Trump's methods, they will also need to present viable alternatives that address the humanitarian crisis at the border. Mexico's role as a transit country for migrants from Central America seeking to reach the U.S. has become increasingly difficult to ignore. With Trump's policies putting more pressure on Mexico to curb migration, the electorate will want to know how its leaders plan to handle the issue without sacrificing human rights or Mexican values. Another critical factor that could shape the elections is the role of the Mexican government in responding to Trump's rhetoric and actions. For many voters, the question is not just how candidates like Sheinbaum will respond to Trump's policies, but how they will represent Mexico's interests in dealing with the U.S. moving forward. Mexico's diplomatic strategy will be tested and the electorate will be looking for leaders who can navigate the complexities of US-Mexico relations while protecting national sovereignty and ensuring economic stability. The stakes are high, and how candidates approach these challenges could determine whether they gain or lose the support of Mexican voters. The border issue is not just about politics or immigration, it's about pride, sovereignty, and the future of Mexico itself. In this election, Mexico faces the difficult task of defining its relationship with the US, in a world where border control and immigration are increasingly politicized. For Claudia Sheinbaum and other political leaders, the election is not just about winning office. It's about defining what Mexico stands for on the global stage and how the country will assert itself in the face of a powerful neighbor. The question remains, how will Mexican voters respond to this pivotal issue, and how much influence will Trump's border policies have on the final outcome of the election? What do you think? Will the Mexican election be decided by the border issue? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Claudia's strategy, economic and diplomatic leverage, as the US continues to assert its dominance along the southern border. With more military presence and stringent immigration policies, Mexico faces a significant challenge in determining how best to navigate these escalating tensions. The political and diplomatic landscape is rapidly evolving, and one question remains crucial. How will Claudia Sheinbaum, one of Mexico's top presidential candidates, respond to this growing pressure? Her strategy will likely shape the future of US-Mexico relations, not only in the coming months, but for years to come. Sheinbaum has the opportunity to leverage both economic and diplomatic tactics, balancing the country's national interests with the need to maintain a complex yet vital relationship with the US. Claudia Sheinbaum has long been known for her pragmatic approach to leadership, especially when it comes to sensitive international issues. With Trump's controversial border policies making waves in Mexico, Sheinbaum understands that diplomacy will be the first and most important tool in her arsenal. However, diplomacy alone may not be enough. The US has already shown that it's willing to use economic and military might to push its agenda on issues like immigration, trade, and national security. So how will Sheinbaum use Mexico's position to ensure that the country doesn't fall victim to this pressure? She will need to use every lever